Thank you so much, Carlo. And I'm so glad to see all of you. I'm so impressed that so many of you could even get on a call during this very challenging time. And I was thinking about this presentation this morning when I was on a all school call for the School of Social Work. And I realized that I could mute myself and keep my video off, and nobody would know that my dog is barking at me and wanting a bone, and that my kids are asking me 50 million things. And I was thinking about you all and the work that you have to do as providers. And I thought, there's no way you can do that. The work you do requires you to be present, even if virtually. So it just gave me more of an appreciation for what all of you have to do during these challenging times. And again, I'm so impressed that you were able even to get on this virtual webinar at all. So I'm going to talk today about COVID-19, and I'm an academic, although I like to tell people that that's my day job, and my real job is really working with and consulting and training with program providers, service providers in the early childhood field mostly. But as an academic, I got to talk a little bit about conceptualization of this crisis we're under and just tell you a little bit about what some emerging research is saying. But I'll try to do that quickly and spend most of my time that I've been allotted really talking about what we can do, because that's your job as providers to do, not to think. You know, there's an old adage that those who can do and those who cannot do think. And I don't want us to be stuck in the thinking place. I want us to really get quickly to the doing place. But Carlo, if you could advance the slide, I'm going to do my little bit of conceptual thinking and a little bit of the research now. So I'm going to start with, and I'm sure many of you have seen this conceptualization. It comes right out of Jack Shonkoff's work at the Center for the Developing Child at Harvard. And I really like it as a frame for all that I do, because the families with whom I work are not middle income, are not families without stressors all the time. I sometimes call them the poverty plus families, because certainly they are in the low income um, uh, sort of segment of society, but they also have many other kinds of things. But let me just quickly tell you the upshot of this diagram. And basically, what Jack Shonkoff is saying is that most of us experience stress, right? We all have stress with getting on technology and all that kind of stuff. But it gets to this toxic frame when we have these kind of chronic insults that have high impact on our functioning, right? Chronic, high impact insults. But one of the things that he says about this is that you have to think about it in the context of your relationships. And if you have a supportive, consistent, stable, nurturing kind of relationship in your life, it could be your friend, your mother, your spouse, it could be your supervisor, whomever, that allows the stressors that really potentially have high impact not to impact you as much. And so then the stressors don't become toxic. Okay, Carla, go on to the next slide. So just quickly, some definitions. I mentioned to you, he argues that this toxic stress idea is strong, frequent, prolonged activation of our body stress response system. So they're taking it down to the physiologic level. But look at what I have in bold and in italics: in the absence of stable adult support, which is good for us as providers, because it means if we provide this stable adult support, and you're going to hear why I think this is so important as I go through about what we should do, then the stressors don't feel so bad. Okay, so that's one point I want you to keep in mind. The second point, I'm going to talk about disparity sums. Jack Shonkoff argues that this toxic stress is probably what's causing the disparities we see between socioeconomic groups, between racial groups, on a variety of adult physical and mental health outcomes. And then he goes on to argue that the risks are so many, too numerous to count. This idea of ACE squared, where you all have heard about adverse childhood experiences, those things like household chaos and all the things that have to do with maltreatment and household dysfunction. But the ACEs squared people say, don't forget the stuff that is really at the roots. That's sort of what happens in your community, like racism and discrimination and chronic poverty and all those kinds of things that lead you to a path that's full of toxic insults. Now, then we got to add on to that what I have in red and bold, which is what has happened as a result of COVID-19. Okay, so we're just going to add that to the list of stressors that our families and that we are experiencing that could potentially lead to toxic stress. But obviously, what I'm going to try to be addressing is to keep us, right? Because I want to talk about how to take care of ourselves as well and what to do to keep our families off this path of toxic stress. Okay, Carlo. So, just quickly, I wanted to make one more point about this toxic stress idea that we know, and you all know this, is linked to a lot of adverse outcomes, right? It affects us at the level of the brain. It affects other organ systems. Like, I don't know if, a lot of you work with very, very young parents and parents in the early stages of parenthood. And one of the things that we know, for example, about African American moms is that they're more likely to deliver premature and low birth weight infants. And there's some suggestion that this really has to do with some of those toxic stressors that I mentioned before, including racism and discrimination. And then, of course, this leads to a ton of other kinds of health and mental health challenges for children as well. Okay, Carlo. So, two slides that I want to sort of say to me are the sine qua non of our work, whether we're talking about doing it virtually or whether we're talking about doing it in the traditional way, which I think is the better way, but we'll see what the world takes us to in this next go round. But two things that I think are critical to our work no matter what, and that is really trying to foment really solid relationships with our families. And remember Jack Shonkoff's definition of toxic stress, the stressors in the absence of stable adult support. So that tells us, and he's pulling this from, research on the brain, for heaven's sakes, but that tells us that the thing that we're all working toward, that we sometimes take for granted, and sometimes we don't think it's as important as it is. Really, we have data that it affects people at the level of the brain. So the relationships that all of you who are on the front lines, and really you are essential workers on the front lines, right? What you do to build relationships with families is the most important thing in the world. So I'm going to talk to you all about, sort of specific strategies to address the issues about COVID-19. But I don't want you to forget the thing that all of us learned to do from, social work 101, clinical work 101, and that is trying to build a solid, nurturing relationship with our families. Okay, Carlo. And the second thing that I want you to think about, again, this sort of broad sine qua non thing, and I have taken this quote from Jeree Paul. I'm a Jeree Paul groupie. She's an infant mental health person, 90-something years old, has made a huge contribution to the field of infant and early childhood mental health. But one of the things that she says is how you are is as important as what you do. So yes, I'm going to talk to you all about strategies. Yes, we're going to think about how to do it virtually. Yes, we're going to think about how you can help parents think about cognitive reattribution, all that kind of stuff. But remember, who you are becomes more important. Now, of course, in an environment where we're virtual, that becomes even harder. And again, I reflected on that as I was on my call this morning, thinking, how can providers be as present as possible with our families when we have our own kids and we got to cook and we got to take care of our elderly relatives and we got to worry about who gets COVID? How can we figure out how to be as present as we can with our families through this virtual mechanism. And I want to just reflect on that with you as we go forward. Okay, Carlo. So here's my image. One of my favorite things about doing presentations is going on Google Images to find things that really reflect what I want to talk about. So this was one of the things I wanted to think about. You all remember the Greek myth about Sisyphus, and he had to keep pushing a boulder up a mountain. But what happened with him was every time he get to the top, the darn thing would fall back down, and he'd have to start all over again. Well, fortunately, we are not in his place, but we still got to push and push and push. And mind you, we're pushing against things that we have no control over. And what you see on that big one is, of course, we're pushing against poverty. And of course, we don't have any control over whether our families are in poverty. But I really like the black and white image, because what it points to is that we're not pushing the boulder by ourselves. We got a whole bunch of other people, providers from other programs, our peers, the directors of our programs, all kinds of other people who are helping us push this boulder. And yes, it's hard. Let's just say what it is. It's hard. We have not had to do anything like this, certainly in my 40 years of work. And I would argue for all the time that you all probably have been doing it. But we just inch it up, inch it up, inch it up. And so that's something I wanted to make sure that I said to you all right from the outset, that we can't do it all. I mean, when I first started my work 40 years ago, I thought I could, but I learned really quickly that I couldn't. And I certainly think we have to say that to ourselves in this horrible, challenging, upending situation that we're in called COVID-19. Okay, Carlo. So let me just give you a little bit of the research. And again, this is like new stuff, new territory. People are just coming out with kind of some of this stuff. But I would bet that many of you could have predicted this. Any of us who've been on the front lines again, working with families, directly could have predicted this. But what do we get? Okay, so we know children's physical health is affected. They're less active. They got a whole lot longer screen time. They have more regular sleep patterns. They're not eating so good because, we're on Zoom calls, so they're getting gummy worms and whatever else they can find, potato chips, whatever else they can find in the house. We're seeing weight gain and potential loss of cardiorespiratory fitness. And of course, this has to do with home confinement, but also the kids just can't get outside as much. They can't go to the playground. They're not having PE. They're not having recess. They're not having the opportunity to interact with their peers and play ball and jump rope and all the things that could help with their physical health. Okay, Carlo. So on top of their physical health, we've got all this psychological stuff that's happening for kids, right? So this thing is going on and on. We thought it would be over in 3 months. And look at us now, where many of our schools are closed now. Children are worried. Am I going to get infected? I mean, one of the things that happened with my daughter recently was I saw the relief on her face when she realized that everybody who got COVID didn't die. And I thought, what a bad mother I am. I didn't help her understand that in the beginning. And it was shocking to me because my kids are adolescents, but she was thinking that every person who got COVID was going to die. So we've got those kind of fears. They're bored at home. They don't get to see their peers. They're frustrated that they can't go back to school. They don't have information, right? Like my kid didn't have the proper information from her own mom. They can't see their teacher, so they can't get the kind of help they need, their friends. They don't have personal space. I mean, my kids are at each other's throats, because they have to spend so much time with each other. They don't have enough space to kind of be apart. And obviously, for our families, a lot of financial loss that has implications for everything from food insecurity to housing insecurity, all that kind of stuff. And by the way, a recent study found that PTSD kind of scores were 4 times higher in kids who were quarantined than those who aren't quarantined. Now, I'm not arguing that we shouldn't quarantine our children. I'm just saying we have to understand what this kind of stuff means to kids. So think about what it means to us and exponentially multiply it for children. Okay, Carlo. So, what else do we know? There's an increase in family conflict. I know one of the things that many of you are probably worried about are our concerns about child maltreatment. When you don't have respite from your children, it makes you more likely to abuse and neglect them. Now, I will say what the Child Protective Services are reporting is that they're getting less calls, right? Because who is our biggest reporter? School districts, right?
Schools.
Kids are not in school. Child care programs, they're not in school. Pediatricians, healthcare personnel are also major reporters. And one of the things that I learned from a project that I'm involved in on the impact of COVID on young children is that about a quarter of families are missing their pediatric visits. So, again, that's another issue because the people who are reporting families to Child Protective Services, whether you believe in what CPS does or not, they can't report because they're not seeing these kids. So, those of us who have our virtual eyes on families might be the ones to pay attention to this kind of stuff since our typical services that tend to see these kids and report them to CPS are not able to see them. And then, of course, what happens to parents, depression, anxiety, more substance use. And I don't just mean using opioids. You see increased cigarette use, you see increased alcohol use, those kinds of things, because parents might be self medicating their depression and anxiety. And then we got these work related issues, and all of us are really concerned about parents who are unemployed. It has obvious ramifications for their being able to stay in their apartments, etc. But we also have to think about parents who are essential workers. And a lot of our families, particularly low income families, are in that essential work category. Who is greeting us at the grocery store? Who is greeting us at the centers for people who are elderly who are going in? Who is providing childcare for essential workers? All that are low income families. And so we have to think about their, higher rates of exposure to COVID and what that means for their health and also their mental health. And we also have to think about what that means for their care of their children. Many of them are working non-traditional hours. Many of them are working 2 and 3 jobs and they don't have childcare. So what does that mean for what we should be doing for families? Okay, next slide, Carlo. I do want to talk to you all a little bit about the disparities. You've heard me mention them. This is a big issue for me in all of my work. There are data now from the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, that African Americans are more likely to be hospitalized and die than other racial ethnic groups. Similarly, data that say people from low income backgrounds are more likely to be hospitalized and die than those with higher SES. Also, in some studies of families with young children, this is the one that I'm involved in, they found that African American and Latino families report greater loss of income and material hardship over time. So, okay, think about it. Starting low SES, and then you're going to even lower levels of SES and higher levels of material hardship. So, our families are really, really struggling. Okay, Carlo. One other disparity slide, I just want to tell you what we're finding in terms of SES disparities in the functioning of families of young children, higher rates of social emotional challenges for low income parents. Particularly, this group was looking at depression and anxiety. This is a group out of University of Oregon. They're doing surveys, weekly surveys of families with young children post-COVID. Higher levels of mental health difficulties. Specifically, they're looking at anxiety and behavior problems for low income children. Decreased income, increased financial difficulties, greater material hardship for them over time, lower level of social support, and less access to childcare supports for low-income families. And I just want to tell you one little thing. This doesn't come from this study, but something I've been like pouring the research, as probably many of you are. And one of the things that they're finding about Latino families is that they are getting sick and dying during middle age. So most of the data suggests that people are getting sick and dying in the elderly years, right? Because they've got all these comorbidities and underlying issues and things. But for Latino families, they're finding that they are getting sick and dying at the age at which you can produce more income, right? It's the time when you're responsible for bringing income into your families. And it suggested that higher rates of Latino workers are in these essential worker kind of categories. And that's why they're getting sick and dying at a younger age than most other groups. So there's some definite racial ethnic disparities and SES disparities that we have to think about. Okay, Carlo. All right, so let's get to the do. Let's just get to the do. And I'm sort of calling this what we should do as having providers create a safety net for families. And I will tell you, my bias is toward thinking about families who are low income, who are at high risk. But one could really think about translating this to all families, but I'm really focused on a particular group of families. So obviously, our kids are going to be at home. For the most part, even though some school districts might be suggesting that they're going to do hybrid, I don't know how they're going to pull it off, number one. But number two, even if they do hybrid, that means that the kids are going to be home half the week. So, one of the things that I think we can provide to families is innovative ways that kids can get virtual learning experiences. And we are fortunate that we're living in a time when we can turn on Sesame Street and okay, you all say, okay, we shouldn't be putting kids in front of the screens. But I'm saying you got to do what you got to do. And there are opportunities on PBS Kids, when we have to work, when our families have to work, that it's not so bad to put them in front of a screen. In fact, I am anti-screen, but I recently attended a webinar that Society for Research and Child Development had done on screen time. And one of the things that they said was, it depends. No, we don't want them looking at a screen all day. But if the screen time is instructive, if it's developmentally appropriate, it can have positive outcomes for kids. So help your families understand that it's okay to put them in front of the TV sometimes. Just don't let them look at Law and Order, which is what I do, right? Let them look at Dora the Explorer. Let them look at Sesame Street. Let them look at something where they can have an opportunity to learn. And if you're in a position as a provider to give them access to those kind of things, it's important because what we're learning is that a lot of low income kids are not taking advantage of school offered online. So one of the things we can do is provide those kind of experiences. Help your families provide a developmentally appropriate explanation of COVID. For little kids to say, why is everybody wearing masks? We can talk to them about like having a cold and how you don't want all your germs going all over people and things like that. For older children, we can help them understand what an infection means. Like with my daughter, helping them to understand that it doesn't mean everybody's going to die, but we have to be very careful. And there's some things that we have to do about this thing that causes people to get sick. Okay, so working with your families, everybody should have had a conversation with their children. And what you'll find is that kids need this over and over and over again. They need constant explanations, as many of you who work directly with children do know. All right, activities about proper hygiene and health. Kids love to draw. They can put health routines on the refrigerator, drawing, hand washing, drawing. They can make masks and things like that. One of the things that every good preschool teacher knows, right? This is way before COVID, is singing that doggone ABC song or that happy birthday song twice so that you can make sure the kids wash their hands for 20 seconds, right? That's the kind of thing you can help your families do. Give them jobs to do. Your job is to use this spray. They love to spray things. Make sure there's no bleach in it, but spray the table to keep our table clean. You can do the spray on the doorknobs, giving children jobs about that kind of thing. Having them look at videos that let them jump all around and dance, and videos that talk about eating right and going to bed and what you should do, all that kind of stuff that we have access to now. You could sort of list them for families and tell them what to pull up on their computers or on their iPhones or on their televisions or something like that. And then certainly helping them to give children lots of very specific praise about when they do things really well. Good job washing your hands. Good job singing that ABC song so you could wash your hands the right amount of time. That kind of thing. Okay, Carlo. So then we want to think about another piece of the safety net, which is promoting positive parenting, right? So all of you probably, this is the goal of your program in some way to promote positive parenting. So I'm just sort of saying, let's do what we always do, but take it up a notch, right? And we're doing it, over the internet or over the phone. But I'm going to talk to you all about some silver linings about that before I'm done. But just I want to list some of those kinds of things. Helping parents to be even more patient and tolerant than they are. So when kids, do things that are driving them up the wall, help them to learn how to do their count to three. Help them to learn how to go in the bathroom and just lock the door sometimes if they just need a moment. Help them to learn how to walk outside in front of their apartment, in front of their house with their mask on just for a moment to calm themselves down. Little things that you can do to help them think about, how can I be more tolerant of my children? Helping them to communicate. And you can do this as part of your virtual session because a lot of times parents don't know the words, and you can coach them in the context of this virtual session to talk to their children about what's going on. Helping them to be more responsive to their children's feelings. When the kids say scared, they're scared. Parents don't say, oh, don't be scared, girl, but trying to get them to understand why they might be more fearful now, why they might want to get in the bed with them and all that kind of stuff. Teaching them how to provide reassurance to children, physical reassurance, psychological, verbal reassurance as well. Having them to use play and storytelling and role playing, all the stuff that little children are just naturally good at, right? But helping them to use that. You could do that on a virtual call with families. And I'm going to show you a couple video clips that we do a lot of videotaping of visits, and we go back and look at the videotapes and talk to parents about them. I'm going to show you a couple of those, so give you an idea about how you can do that kind of thing. Having them to understand there might be short-term changes in sleep arrangements. Yes, we want to make sure the routines stay the same. And I'm going to talk a little bit about routines in just a second. But if a kid is scared, let them sleep with you. Even though you've worked so hard to get that child in the other room, it might be a way to say to the child, I know you're scared. I know you're worried. For this one night, you can sleep with me, but then tomorrow I'll go into sleep with you until you're able to do it by yourself. Comforting activities before bedtime, going back to the whole idea of transitions. You all know that bedtime is a very scary transition time for little kids. And that's why they act so crazy when it's time for bed, because, a lot of times, am I going to wake up? Where's my mom? I'm going to have a nightmare and she's not going to be there. I won't be able to find my dad. He might get sick. And again, the children that I work with and many of you work with, it's even more of a scary time because really bad things do happen at night. There are all kind of ambulance sirens and people getting shot and all that kind of stuff. So it's a realistic fear. So we want to do things. And again, this helps children with the transition. It helps respond to their needs, having a bedtime routine. Now, what happens with a lot of our families is that there's no separate bedroom, but they can still have a routine even if their child is sleeping in the same room with them. Okay, it's time to go to bed. Here's your favorite toy. Here's your favorite blankie. Mom's going to be over here. I'll be able to check with you, but it's your time to go to sleep. Whatever you can do in the context of that parent situation to create a routine. Now, I said to you, family routines. Little kids are big conformists, right? They like to know I can predict what's going to happen. In a scary time like this, where you can't predict who's going to get sick and who's not and who's going to die, these kind of routines are even more important. I don't think it has to be a middle class routine where, we're going to wake up at this time and have lunch at this time. but a routine that fits that family, that the kid knows, the kid can draw and put on the refrigerator. I get up, I eat my breakfast, and then I read, and then I have a snack. That kind of thing, like what you do in an early childhood classroom, and you have a picture of it, really helps children to be able to predict what's going to happen during the day. And that is critical for little kids in a time when so much is unpredictable. So, really help your families with that and keep their kids from looking at the news and getting things across feeds and stuff like that, because of course they get a lot of misinformation, but also they get a lot of information that makes them more anxious than they need to be. Okay, Carlo, you can go to the next one. So, couple other things about supporting family well-being, right? Emphasize that this will get better. You're going to see my last slide about that, something that my grandmother always taught me, but this is going to get better. It won't be like this forever. And I think that's an important message for kids, but I also think it's an important message for you as providers to give to parents. It will get better, right? We already talked about the schedule thing. I think you have to talk to them about making sure that they try to do as many things in their household that they know will make their family feel better. So, one of the questions you can ask them is, tell me about times in your life where you have felt under stress. Somebody died, or somebody was sick, or you didn't have enough money, or whatever you think about. Tell me about that time and tell me the things that you as a family that you did that helped a little bit. So you ask them that question. So the things I have on here, like reading, watching movies, my kids and I now have a movie night, where we look at movies. Sometimes they fall asleep on them. We just looked at Hamilton, which is now on Netflix. I couldn't believe it, but I couldn't afford those $200 tickets, but I got to look at it on Disney, whatever it is. And that was part of our movie night. Maybe families can't afford Netflix, but they can look at something else. So it could be that. Dancing, a big thing among a lot of our cultures. Families can dance together, and that'll help with some of the worries about obesity and no physical activity we're worrying about. Playing games, whatever those are, they can make them up. Exercising together. And certainly a lot of families who do rely on religious support can take advantage for all of these kind of religious activities that now are offered online. All over the place, churches are saying, bring them on, and they can access those free. Understanding that it is completely normal to experience loneliness, boredom, all those kinds of fears are normal. So you have to give them that message. I hear you. I understand it. And guess what? It's okay. We all are struggling with that. And then, having them have some fun, because goodness knows it is a terrible time. We're talking about COVID, but we've got racial unrest, we've got political worries, we got so much going on now that a message you really have to give them is, let's think about how you can have some fun this week. And maybe that's the homework you can give them as a result of your virtual meeting. All right, so a couple more things I want to say about supporting family well-being, and I want to move through this quickly because I want to talk about taking care of yourselves. We got to say to families that you got a situation here. You got to think about when you can do what. If you've got, to sleep at a certain time, is there somebody who can be with your children around school? But, talking to them about, tell me what's happening in your day. What do you need to do? And let's think together about how we can make it as best we can for you and for your children, given the reality. One of the things that I say to parents all the time is, you do what you can. You do what you can, and forgive yourself if you can't. Yes, I'm asking you to show them, Sesame Street and all. And yes, I'm asking you to put up your iPhone so I can see you in parent-child interaction. But guess what? I know things are crazy. You're going to do what you can do, and I'm forgiving you, and you need to forgive yourself for what you can't, right? Think about focusing on what gives the parent meaning and purpose, and let everything else go. I mean, we just can't do it all. Help them to figure out a way to give them small breaks. And I wasn't kidding when I said go in the bathroom and lock the door, because sometimes that's the only kind of small break that they get. But help them to, think about other things that they can do. Help them to think about the sort of cognitive statements they make to themselves. I'm tired. I can't do this. I don't want to do it. I'm stressed out, blah, blah, blah. Think about ways to turn that around. What positive goes on in their lives? What have they done and accomplished? And one of the things I often tell my supervisees is that when you focus on strengths and then you go all out praising families for that little thing that they did, it matters so much to them to hear you say that. So, have them tell you, what do you think you have accomplished? And when they say, well, I did get up this morning and get them some cereal, well, you jump up and down about them getting up and giving the kids cereal instead of staying in the bed when they really felt like staying in the bed, right? Help them to know that how they are managing worries is important because they're teaching their children about how to manage worries. So see if they can hold that in their head, that learning to cope, learning to manage, taking a deep breath, all those kinds of things that you can help them with, they are actively teaching their children what to do at the same time. And in the unfortunate situation, if somebody gets sick or dies, one of the things that we should support them to do is really getting as much connection as they can to families over the phone or internet, whatever they have. A lot of our families don't have computers, but they've got iPhones. Have them really have this kind of conversation. My kids follow all the social media, and they recently showed me this woman and her son who went to her mother's house. Her mother and father, they were elderly, and they couldn't go to the house because they didn't want to expose them. But they stayed in the car as an adolescent boy, and he turned the music up really, really loud in front of the parents' house, and he was having a dance off with his grandparents. They were dancing in the door, and he was dancing at the car. So little things like that really do keep the content, the sort of connections going, and finding ways to honor the death of a loved one. We lost somebody and we couldn't have a funeral, but we all sort of talked to each other and did a Zoom call about her and all this kind of stuff. So things like that can make meaning of this kind of thing that happens that hurts so much, but you don't have any way to kind of keep your cultural rituals up. And of course, seeking help for it from a trusted spiritual guide. And a lot of churches are doing that kind of thing. And there are a lot of ways to get online mental health support nowadays as well. Okay, Carlo. All right. Um, you already heard me mention what I have in bold hill here, the continued support for parent-child interaction. I think this is really possible. We can use these doggone iPhones to do that. I come out of a Head Start model, and there's a lot of work around parent committees because we have been doing a lot of virtual stuff anyway. It was a natural thing, but you all can start parent committees at your agencies where they can talk together about how to make sure their kids, are healthy and get the kind of supports they need for school. It creates a peer network that you all can create to them, providing online services from your agency, as well as connecting them with online services that are available outside of your agencies that help them deal with these mental health issues, domestic conflicts, etc. And then just be consistent. I started this out by talking about relationships, and I have to say, they need this, and you all know this. I'm preaching to the choir here. they need to know that they have a lifeline, and we can be that lifeline, right? You can text families often. My experience is these families will respond to text if they don't respond to anything else. And there's some interesting data now in home visiting as well as in mental health, where they're saying the attendance at visits, adherence to visits is increasing now that we're in this situation. So it seems like families are much more likely to attend our visits because they're on the phone or whatever. Okay, Carlo. So clearly, you heard me say when I started talking about the data, we know that material hardship is increasing for these families, etc. One of the programs that I'm working with, the big hit that they've had is doing contactless drop off of food. So they are sort of taking a food box or a food bag to families, leaving it at the door, texting them that it's there, and leaving. Families who are going through food insecurity really, really appreciate this. Yesterday, I did my service hours. My kids are supposed to be doing service hours to get out of high school, but of course, who ends up doing some of the service hours is me. So yesterday, I was by myself and I went to the diaper bank and I had a whole big car full of diapers that we were taking around to families. That's something else that you can do. Many of you work with families who have young children. They can't get their hands on this. They can't get their hands on cleaning and medical supplies like Lysol. So anything like that you can do will really go a long way to sustain families in your program. We got technology now, right? I would love to see, I mean, our public school district gave all the kids who were low income iPads to do their schoolwork. You all can use these iPads for your televisits. So now that they have them, so they're there. You might, if you have, for some very, very high risk families where you're worried about child abuse, neglect, you're worried about intimate partner violence, and you have money left over in your budgets because you're not doing as much transportation, you might want to use those prepaid phones and have give those families who are often isolated some contact to the external world through you, a lifeline. So think about that if your agency has any kinds of things. Help them with applying for this, all these income supports, the unemployment that's running out, the Medicaid expansion that many programs many states are doing. Offer to help them apply for these kind of things that could stave off some of the income insecurity that they have. Obviously, providing them lots of information about community resources. And if you have any, again, extra money in your agency, think about giving them gift cards for food. I know we've been giving Amazon gift cards and Target gift cards, and you can buy food at Target. And if they need transportation, then you can kind of get them. So anything like that will, as you know, concrete supports go a long way in keeping families engaged with your agency. Okay, now I want to stop about families, and I think I have about 30 more minutes, right, Carlo? Is that right? I'm making sure that I'm doing my time right. I have about 30 minutes.
Yes, you do.
Okay, thank you. Great. I wanted to make sure that I gave myself enough time to talk about you all. So, the truth is, everything that we say about ways we can help our families, really, we could use to help ourselves because many of us are in a situation where we are helping with families with children, we're grandparents, or we have children at home ourselves. One of the speakers on our all school meeting this morning had two little boys who were yelling at her in the middle of her. They weren't screaming. They just were like, Mommy this, Mommy that, Mommy that, in the middle of her presentation. I felt so much for her, but all I could think was, we're all in the same boat here. We're all struggling with trying to figure, this all out. And so it's important for us to do the same things we're telling parents to do. Remember that parallel process idea, right? That in order for parents to take care of children, they need somebody to take care of them, and that often is us. And in order for us to take care of the parents so they can take care of the children, somebody's got to take care of us. Now, the problem is many of us are nurturers and we nurture other people, but we're nurturing everybody else and there's nobody to nurture us. So, my argument is we got to make that a priority for ourselves. And I'm actually trying to teach my kids that right now. Don't wait for somebody to take care of you. You figure out a way to take care of yourself. So, one of my favorite things, as I mentioned to you all, is looking for images to go on my slides. And one of my self care priorities is teaching us to have boundaries so that we aren't always taking care of everybody. That at some point we say, I'm shutting this down. I'm not doing anymore for anybody else. The energy is going back toward me. And so that's my main point to you, that many of us are in this field because we are just born caregivers. Maybe it was how we were raised, who knows? But we got to at some point say, I'm going to use my best skills at caregiving and take care of myself. So let's talk about what that might look like. Okay, Carlo, you can go on to the next slide. So let's think about your needs for a minute, all of our needs. So you're a provider at work, you don't have a job where all you're doing is, like a fancy secretary in a fancy law firm who can just sit there and, type up briefs and things like that, where she doesn't have to give, she just has to use her skill. You have to be a caregiver on your job, which, as I said before, means you have to be particularly present. And on top of that, you're a provider at home, you're a teacher at home, you're a cook at home. Now, I just think about all the food that my kids are eating and how dirty my sink is all the time. And I thought, why is my sink so dirty? Then I said, it's because they're eating at home 50 times a day. That's why. Where before they were eating at school and all this kind of stuff. So cooks and your childcare workers and your nurses at home, because you don't want to take your kid to the doctor, or they're telling you not to bring your kid to the doctor because they worry about COVID. And you're the therapist and you're the safety monitor. So we've got this horrible role overload that really results in us feeling stressed. And we don't have the psychological resources that we may have had before, because we're not at a place where we can go, knock on the door of our supervisor or a peer and all that kind of stuff. So we got all these demands, we got pressures from programs. The hierarchies are saying you still got to do the work even though you're at home. And so the secondary trauma and the burnout that you see in this field has been, you know, exponentially multiplied because we are trying to do it in a crazy environment. On top of that, we've got to have tremendous executive functioning skills. And I'll just be honest with you all, this is my downfall. I don't do this really well, but you got to be a good planner. You got to be a good time management person. You got to problem solve all the time. You got to selectively focus. So when your kids are pulling at your skirt and you're on a visit, you got to pay attention to the mom and try to tell the kid in some way, I'll be with you in a minute. That's hard to do. It's really hard to do. And then we got to really try to get our emotions together so we don't get upset at the kids while they're pulling on us, while we're trying to do our job. We got to keep trying to be empathic when, we feel like nobody's being empathic with us. And you're just worn out. You're just worn out. So we're in this position where our psychological resources have been depleted. And so it becomes even more important for us to think about taking care of ourselves. So go ahead to the next slide, Carlos. So you all know about reflective practice. And I think, again, that because we're in a position where the challenges are so different than what we are used to, and we add that to the challenges that are unique to our own experience anyway as providers, then reflective practice becomes even more important. So you got to find some time to do that, even if it's when you're lying in your bed as you're trying to go to sleep or you're waking up first thing in the morning. This is when I do a lot of my reflection before I go out and face my kids and the dog who's whining and all that kind of stuff, right? So this should be a review for most of you, but what is reflective practice? You are thinking about what you do, right? You're thinking about what you think and you're thinking about what you feel. Like, is there a client that you know you have to talk to today who gets on your nerves? Well, maybe that client is the one you talk to first so you can get the energy you need to be more responsive. Okay. And let's add to that to think about how you're able to do this and feel okay about being a provider in your experience with COVID. If you are taking care of elderly relatives, for example, and you're working with a family who's doing the same thing, how do you manage that? And how can you use your experience to help that family? Not to disclose so much because we want to, again, be careful of boundaries, but use your experience as a provider for elderly people who might, you're worried about because of the disease and infection and all that stuff, how you can use that to help this family who's going through the same thing, right? And where do we do reflective practice? Well, I'm talking mostly about sort of doing it inside ourselves, but really, we should also be making sure we get reflective supervision and some peer interaction that allows us to reflect on what it's like to try and do all this kind of caring, nurturing work in the context of a pandemic that's affecting us as well. Okay, Carlo, next slide. So I titled this slide Beyond Ice Cream, and I stole this title from a colleague who stole it from something I had said. I often talk about how, as a beginning home visitor, this is, like 40 years ago at this point, on Fridays, I used to go get myself a pint of ice cream to sort of celebrate that I got through the week and got my visits done and didn't lose it on families and all that kind of stuff. Well, of course, I could do that then and not worry about the pounds. Now I have to worry about the pounds, can't do it as much anymore. But what this colleague was saying was also, okay, let's think about self-care that's a little more meaningful, okay? Not just sort of gorging yourself with ice cream. And I thought that was a very good point. So I wanted to put out some things for you all. First of all, you see, the first thing I have on there is flexibility, and I have it in caps because I think in this time of COVID, we just aren't going to be able to make all the visits. We're not going to be able to be the best clinicians we could be. We're not going to be able to accomplish all the goals on the family partnership agreement or on the developmental, plan. It's just not going to happen. So I want us to feel okay about not doing everything that we set out to do. Just being flexible and do what you can on these visits. I also want us to think about really getting access to our own mental health support. And if your agencies don't provide it, you should ask for it. You should ask for it because I think when you're in times of crisis, you need the support even more. And one way to get that is to have, like they do in Head Start, these mental health consultants that sometimes they contract with who can provide that support virtually on an individual or a group basis. I also believe very much in routine de-stressing activities for staff. And when I ran a program, we would do it every Friday. And I would argue that this is something that could happen very easily virtually. If you go on 0 to 3's website, every Friday they have a noontime mindfulness session that you can go to get on for free. but I think agencies can do that kind of thing. I mean, I did it on Friday, 0 to 3 is doing it on Friday. It doesn't have to be on Friday, but it's a time that you come together as staff just to de-stress, to take care of yourself, right? To exercise, maybe do some massage, to have some humor, to tell a story. But it's just the whole purpose is not to go through cases or anything like that, but to really just breathe and bring it down, right? And then to think about mindfulness, right? Which I'm going to do a little exercise with you all right now in just a second, but let's just think about what that means. I mentioned to you that 0 to 3 has this noontime mindfulness um, session that you can access on Zoom. But what is it about? It's about focusing on the present. So not thinking about what you got to do tomorrow, not even thinking about what you have to do in the next hour, and certainly not thinking about what happened before, right? It's just an opportunity to focus right on the immediate present, what's going on in this moment, not what's going on in this hour and a half webinar, but what's going on in this moment. And what you do is you really start tuning into even your body, like, where you're feeling one of your pains. Like I have a bad knee. I can feel the knee right now because I'm pulling myself into that space. But, your stomach rumbling because maybe you haven't had your lunch or, maybe your feet are hot, whatever. You're really getting so attuned inside yourself. And then you start to get attuned to your emotions. Like, what am I feeling in this moment? Do I feel worn out, tired? Do I feel sad? Is there a piece of that there? Am I feeling like I need to be connected with somebody? But you're just getting close into your emotions. And there's an idea that this kind of going inside yourself really contributes to your capacity to self-regulate and contributes to short and long-term well-being. Okay. So I'm going to encourage you all to do that. And you can do it in any space and it doesn't cost you a dime, right? You can do it. I will tell you in terms of my executive functioning skills, I'm terrible at all but one, and that is selective attention. I can say I am getting rid of all of this stuff around me, my kids talking. They'll say, Mom, are you hearing me? I say, just a minute, just a minute. Sometimes I don't even hear them say that. The dog whining, all that kind of stuff. I can go inside myself in any time and place. And I encourage you to do that. And when you come out of it, you really do feel refreshed. Just 2, 3 minutes. So I'm going to take us through one. Carlo, you can go ahead to the next slide. So I adapted this from Maria Gill. She's the one who does the mindfulness moments. And I see somebody put it in the chat. Thank you. Looks like somebody did it for me. Thank you. Um, but they have a toolkit that you can pull down from the 0 to 3 website for early childhood programs. And I just adapted this really simple one, a breathing technique from them. So I'm going to ask you all to get quiet and just close your eyes for a moment. And if you're the kind of person who can't tolerate that because you need to see, just look down in front of you for a minute, right? And think that you're in a safe space, right? Because you're not having to worry about anything or anybody at the moment, right? And just say to yourself, I'm liking that I'm thinking about taking care of myself for this moment. Just give yourself that gift of saying, for this moment, I'm going to take care of myself. And think about, I got everything I need. I don't need a pencil. I don't need anything to drink. I got myself. I got myself in this moment, right? And just stay focused on the here and now. Go inside yourself. Do what I mentioned before. Think about what you're feeling. physically, what you're feeling emotionally, but have a clean slate of a mind. No worries about clients, no worry about kids, no worry about adults you got to take care of, just you. Just you. And then I want you to start breathing. Just in and out. And pay very, very close attention to the breathing. What happens when you go and inhale? You feel your stomach maybe expanding. You feel the air going down the tube, going into your lungs. Just think about that feeling. And then exhale and focus in on what happens to your breath as you exhale. It goes out of your body. What happens to your body? And just do that a few times. Inhale and exhale. And think about that little transition, that resting breath that happens when what you take in goes out. And just stay in that place for just a moment. I hope you all gave yourself an opportunity for that. Carlo, if we could just go to the next slide, I'm going to conclude and then open it up for any questions. I am feeling much better already. The anxiety from doing this webinar is now out of my body. So I will conclude by saying, certainly we all are experiencing many challenges in this current landscape. And I'm going to encourage you to focus on what I call the 3 F's. Focus on the F's. Flexibility, you just go with the flow. And if you are anybody who's been working with families for a long time like I have, you just got to do that anyway. Forgiving yourself for not doing everything in the way you would normally do it, and really helping families to forgive themselves, and really thinking about the future in that we will not be in this always. Okay. I would also argue that we can make a difference for families despite of and within these challenges. We can focus on the relationships we have. We can use technology to continue to support these moment to moment interactions of parents and children and promoting positive caregiving. And we can give families and give ourselves the concrete and psychological supports that they and we need to keep it going and to find a way to have our joy every moment, every day, and every year. So I mentioned to you that I was going to close with this thing from my grandmom. So Carla, if you go to the last slide, any of you all who are brought up in the Black church certainly will remember this. There are all kinds of songs and stuff about this. Weeping may endure for the night, but joy comes in the morning. And that's what I'm holding on to. And I'm hoping that you all will be able to tell that to yourselves and support your families and the children that they are parenting to know that a better day will come. And with that, I think we have about 10 minutes for questions.
Yes, we do. I really want to thank you, Brenda. That was a great presentation. And I guess Sam is going to do those. Any questions or reflections that Sam, can you read those or help me out
I
with?
I don't see any in the chat right now, but if anyone has a question, feel free to write them in and I will read them out.
I am seeing that they're very happy with that, with the presentation. So several comments. Um, Brenda, any suggestions? I mean, you know, people are kind of how to kind of work with um, more difficult families during that time. I know you mentioned, you know, doing them first, but was just wondering about how to kind of get yourself geared up to kind of handle, you know, difficult families that might not be have a hard time engaging.
Right. I think, what we have to show those families is that we are indeed a lifeline, which means that we up the engagement attempts, number one. So whereas one family who's plodding along okay, I might text once a week, that kind of family I'd be texting every day, to be honest. And I would do some kind of, with my supervisor, look at my cases and see, okay, here's the family that's got 5 issues. Here are the ones I'm going to text on a day to day basis to check in. I would also try, and, we have limited resources and limited energy. One of the things that is that you want to connect with those families, you give them something concrete, right? So those are the families that I might say I'm going to do my drop offs for and things like that. I
Mhm.
also think that those are the families that I would want to, you know, be with more. So if it's possible to, have a session with those families twice a week instead of once a week, I would try. Part of the reason I say that is because for relationship building with those families, they need to uh, have some kind of physical reminder, if you will, that you're there, number one, but also their resource needs are so great that if you don't sort of double the opportunity to be with them, to be present with them, all you'll be doing is case management. And part of what I hope providers in this on this call are doing who work with families with young children is really trying to keep the parent-child interaction going. But for those families who are really, really high risk, they often have these great resource needs that you need to address in order for them to feel like they can trust you, right? So you need some time to be able to do that on top of all the curricula and all these other things that you're trying to do with them. And I feel like once they feel like they can trust, you'll be surprised about how much they disclose. I mean, Carlo, I may have even learned this from you and your substance using work, that you don't get families to disclose um, their substance use until long after you've started working with them,
Yes.
because they don't feel comfortable about disclosing. So some of the intervention data look crazy because we've got low use of substances at first and then high use at the end, but partly because the family feels more comfortable disclosing that. And I
Uh,
do think when they disclose it, we have to be ready to try and, address it. Certainly you can expect that parents are going to be depressed, right? So you kind of want to start with that right from the beginning and asking questions, not, going down our depression screener. I mean, I
right.
don't feel we should do that, but sort of
Brenda, can
asking
I stop you for a
open,
second
sure,
here? There are a
sure.
couple of questions that came in just as we're talking now, so I thought
Sorry.
I'd try and get you
Yeah,
to
yeah,
answer a couple of those questions as well.
sure. 'Cause
Um,
I think
so somebody was asking about after a long day of work at home, how do you switch from the work piece, without, you're not going to work and coming back, and how do you switch from the work piece to the family piece? Any suggestions?
Well, I really think that we have to make it a very clear shift. And that's part of what I meant about boundaries, that if you could do your work in your bedroom with the door closed, tell your kids you'll be out, and when you come out, leave that computer there. I mean, I think we should be very clear about changing roles. I mean, I do my work in this little teeny room that doesn't have windows, but it allows me to say this is my workplace, and when I go out into the rest of my house, I'm leaving the work there. And I always take a minute to get myself a cup of tea, right? It's like my ritual. I think it's important to have rituals. I get myself a cup of tea. I'm drinking a lot of chai these days. That is my signal to myself, and I'm done for the day. I'm done for the day. And we have to say, we're done for the day. I am not going back in that little room. Now, I will admit, once my kids going back to sleep, I'm back on the computer. But for that time, I am done. And I'm not going to be running back into this room. I shut the door. I mean, it's a very physical act on my part to say to myself, I am making a shift. So, whatever kind of ritual you can come up with yourself, to sort of separate that out and to set the boundary clear, I think would be really helpful.
One last question. I think we got a couple of minutes here till we finish. Are there any recommendations to decrease anxiety in pregnant women about keeping prenatal appointments in fear of contracting COVID?
Well, I feel like this is a big issue because, as I mentioned to you before, um, we're finding in this one study that the University of Oregon is doing that parents are not, a quarter of parents are not taking their kids in for the pediatric visit. So I know pregnant women are worried about it as well. I mean, I think you just have to, give them the information, right? Give them the information, but also ask them what their worries are and try to talk to them about, both sides, that, they've got a baby they're bringing into the world, and that baby's going to require certain kinds of things. They're going to have to figure it out when they go for their pediatric appointments, but really try to hear their anxiety, acknowledge their anxiety, empathize with their anxiety, and then try to communicate with them in as factual a way as possible, which means you're going to have to, go online and get the data from the perinatal people about the possibility of COVID and transmitting COVID to infants, which right now it looks like it's very rare,
Yep.
thankfully. It looks like it's very rare, and sort of give them that information and help them understand it and help them weigh, what's more important at this time. But it's real. I mean, and I think I always start with empathy. Always start with empathy.
And it may be really helpful for them to actually have their provider do a call or a video with the provider to kind of find out how they protect and reassure the woman about how she can be protected while they're doing the visit. So that might be another possibility.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Well, thank you, Brenda. This has been wonderful. I hope all of you have benefited not only from the wisdom, but also from the self-care part, because I do think that's critical. We do need to take care of ourselves in this time of COVID and all the time, but especially in this time of COVID. So thank you, Brenda, and thank all of you for participating. It's been a wonderful group. Thank you very much.